For 50 years, my grandmother gave her church everything. Her time, her money, her unwavering faith. She cooked for them, cleaned for them, and prayed for them. When a car accident left her broken and homebound for the last 10 years of her life, they gave her nothing in return. Not a single call, not one visit. Then, on her deathbed, her pastors finally showed up. They didn't come to offer comfort. They came to ask about her will. They had absolutely no idea. She had already prepared an answer for them. An answer that would become her final and most powerful sermon. If you believe that true character is revealed when no one is watching, and that justice, no matter how long it takes, is one of life's most satisfying moments, then hit that subscribe button right now, like this video, and settle in, because this is a story about a woman of unshakable faith. And the day her family watched her deliver one last, unforgettable lesson from beyond the grave. Let's get into it. My grandmother, Beatrice, was the kind of woman who seemed to be carved from the very bedrock of the earth. Strong, steady, and foundational to everyone around her. For her entire adult life, she was a pillar of Redemption Heights Fellowship, a massive, conservative evangelical church in a wealthy suburb deep in the American Bible Belt. And when I say a pillar, I don't mean she just attended on Sundays. She was part of the mortar holding the place together. Every Sunday morning, without fail, she was in the church nursery, a calm and gentle presence for fussy babies and anxious new mothers. She helped cook for hundreds of church fellowship meals, her hands, wrinkled and knowing, expertly preparing mountains of food. She chaperoned dozens of retreats and choir tours, a guardian angel for generations of kids, including my own. She taught youth Bible study on Sunday nights, her passion for her faith so genuine it was contagious. She tithed 10% of every dollar she ever earned, and then gave extra for missions and special offerings whenever the plate was passed. But Grandma's greatest gift wasn't her cooking or her tireless work. It was her talent for making other people feel seen, truly seen. I witnessed it firsthand countless times. I belonged to a different church, but I'd often visit her, and that meant going to Redemption Heights functions with her. I remember one particular Saturday morning. She'd woken up before dawn to single-handedly cook a full breakfast for a prayer meeting of over 30 high schoolers. It was a monumental task, taking her over 2 hours in the church's industrial-sized kitchen. She was sweating, her back was clearly aching, but she had a smile on her face. After the meal, when everyone was full and happy, she quieted the room. But she didn't ask for a thank you. Instead, she pointed to the teenage student leader and said, "Let's give a huge round of applause for Mark, for doing such an incredible job organizing this prayer breakfast." She made him the hero of the day, and he stood a little taller. That was her magic. She built people up. There was another time, one that always stuck with me. Even as a kid, we were on a youth retreat at a rustic camp in the middle of nowhere. One of the assistant pastors, we'll call him Pastor Todd Doyle, had forgotten a crucial box of evangelistic materials back in the city. He was panicking, worried he'd look like a fool in front of his boss, the senior pastor, who we'll call Reverend Alistair Finch. Without a second thought, Grandma got in her car and drove through most of the night to retrieve that box. She made it back just in time for the morning program. Pastor Doyle took the box, didn't even say thank you, and went on with his day. His boss, Reverend Finch, never knew about the screw-up or the angel who fixed it. Even as a child, the injustice of it burned in my gut. I asked her, "Grandma, why aren't you mad?" "He didn't even thank you." She just patted my hand and gave me that serene smile of hers.
"Oh, honey, that doesn't matter," she said. "My reward is knowing that those materials will help children find Jesus."
She truly believed it. Her service wasn't for the praise of men. It was for her God. Then, at the age of 73, her life of service came to a sudden, brutal halt. A car accident. Her back was broken. The injury, combined with the slow, inevitable decline of age, left her homebound for the last 10 years of her life. Her mind remained a fortress, sharp, clear, and witty. Her faith was as sincere as ever. But her body, the vessel that had carried her through a lifetime of service, had finally worn out. During those 10 long years, She tried to stay connected to the church that had been her entire world. She'd call, leaving messages for her old friends. She'd send cards. She'd invite people to visit, hoping for a familiar face, a shared memory, a prayer. Every single invitation was met with silence. Declined, or more often, simply ignored. The church she had built with her own 2 hands had forgotten she existed the moment she could no longer work for them. Near the very end, when she was in home hospice care, she decided to plan her own funeral. She wanted it to be at Redemption Heights Fellowship, a final farewell from the place she had loved so much. My grandpa called the church office and asked for Reverend Finch, a man she'd known for over 3 decades, to visit and help them plan the service. Reverend Finch was, of course, too busy. A few days later, Pastor Doyle stopped by. My grandpa was there, and he told us what happened, his voice tight with a rage that had simmered for years. My grandmother was lying on her deathbed, frail and in constant pain. They discussed the funeral for a few minutes. Hymns, scriptures, then Pastor Doyle's tone shifted. He leaned in, a sickly sweet smile on his face. "You know," he began, "this is a time to think about your legacy. A time to lay up your treasure in heaven by remembering your church and your will." My grandpa, a retired steel worker and a Korean War combat veteran, cut him off. "This is not the time or the place to discuss her will." His voice was low and dangerous. They went back to the funeral plans for a moment. But Pastor Doyle was like a dog with a bone. He steered the conversation right back to Grandma's estate, peppering his speech with Bible verses about storing up treasure in heaven. "Where your treasure is," he'd say, "your heart will be also." He talked about the church's financial needs, how badly her church needed her support. Grandpa warned him again. He told him it was grossly inappropriate. He explained that his wife was terminally ill, that she was on powerful painkillers, but was still in agony. Pastor Doyle would nod, feign agreement, talk about a hymn, and then, like a shark circling, he'd come right back to the money. And then, it happened. My grandmother started to cry. To understand the gravity of this, you have to understand my grandma. She wasn't just a steel magnolia. My grandpa used to say she was titanium coated with diamond wrapped in Kevlar. She simply did not cry for herself. Ever. When the doctor told her she would never walk again, not a tear, during the 6 months of grueling, futile rehab, she was a rock. She would cry for others at funerals, or when visiting a sick friend, she would weep with those who weep. But for herself, never. And here she was, on her deathbed, sobbing uncontrollably. Broken not by the pain in her back, but by the greed in the heart of the man sent from the church she adored. That was it. Grandpa, a man who had faced enemy fire without flinching, saw the one thing that could break him: his wife's tears. He physically grabbed Pastor Doyle by the arm, lifted him out of his chair, and as he put it, escorted him out of the house. I imagine it wasn't a gentle process. Against all odds, Grandma held on for another 6 months. Pure, unadulterated force of will. When she finally passed, we held her memorial service at the funeral home. Redemption Heights Fellowship was not involved. Reverend Finch and Pastor Doyle were conspicuously absent. In fact, not a single professional Christian from her former church bothered to show up. At the service, Grandpa stood at the podium. "Some of you may have heard that I disinvited Reverend Finch and Pastor Doyle from this funeral," he said, his voice clear and strong. "This isn't the place for me to explain why, but you all know me, and you know my reasons are good ones. Besides," he added, "my wife asked me to. This is going to be an open microphone funeral," he continued. "Anyone who wants to say something, tell a story, share a memory, please come up." And people did. For over 2 hours, a third of the 100 people there stood up and spoke about the woman who had touched their lives. We laughed. We cried. We hugged. Her grandchildren played her favorite songs on the piano and guitar. It was the most uplifting, authentic, and comforting funeral I have ever attended. More than one person remarked, "Funerals are better without preachers anyway." A couple of weeks later, it was time for the reading of the will. In our family, the reading of the will was a tradition, an excuse for our sprawling clan to gather. But Grandpa had been fanning the flames of the family rumor mill, hinting that Grandma's will contained surprises. So, the lawyer's conference room was packed. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone was there. And then, to our collective shock, Reverend Alistair Finch and Pastor Todd Doyle walked in. They announced, with an air of smug satisfaction, that Grandma's lawyer had informed them that they and Redemption Heights Fellowship had been personally named as beneficiaries. My cousins and I exchanged glances. The two pastors were practically salivating. You could see the dollar signs flashing in their eyes. The conference room was small and overflowing. Extra chairs had been brought in, and people were standing against the walls. The lawyer, who happened to be my uncle, gestured for the two pastors to take the only remaining seats, 2 chairs at the front of the room, right next to him, facing the entire family. They beamed, gratified to be given places of honor. They failed to notice what the rest of us saw immediately. They were now trapped, boxed in by a room full of people who knew at least part of the story, with their only escape route, the single door at the back of the room, completely blocked. The will reading began. The bequests were generous, but expected. Grandpa got the house and the bulk of the estate. Children and grandchildren received nice sums of money. Sentimental items were given to friends and relatives. The bequests were read in order of increasing value, and with each name called, the pastor's anticipation grew. They were last on the list, and they could see the exponential upward trend of Grandma's generosity. Their payday was going to be huge. Finally, my uncle, the lawyer, reached their part of the will. He cleared his throat. "This is a bit unusual," he said, "but before I announce these final bequests, Ms. Beatrice Abernathy requested that I read a statement she wrote." He unfolded a letter, written in Grandma's familiar, elegant handwriting. The room went silent. The pastors leaned forward, expecting a flowery tribute to their spiritual guidance. My uncle began to read. "For the past 10 years, not one person from Redemption Heights Fellowship has ever called me, come to visit me, or sent me a note to tell me that they cared about me." The pastor's smiles began to falter. Not one minister, not one deacon, not one of the church women I worked with for all those years, whom I loved dearly and thought were my friends. I worked very hard for you when you needed me. But when I needed you, you all pretended that I didn't exist. The air in the room grew thick. Every eye was now locked on the 2 men in the front. I only got one visit. When I was dying, I invited Reverend Finch to my home. He couldn't find the time. Pastor Doyle came instead. But he didn't want to talk about my funeral. He just wanted me to remember his church in my will. That's all. It was then that I realized I had allowed my church to break my heart for the very last time. My uncle paused, letting the words sink in. The pastors looked like they'd been slapped. He continued reading Grandma's letter. Pastor Doyle did not know it, but Grandpa and I had already prepared my will long before his visit. And it did include a double tithe, 20% of my entire estate for what was now my former church. He named the amount. A wave of soft wows and muffled gasps rippled through the family. It was an enormous, life-changing sum of money. The pastor's eyes went wide. For a split second, they thought they'd won. But the letter went on. I got to feeling badly that we had not personally remembered such nice people as Reverend Finch and Pastor Doyle. So I changed my will, and while I was at it, I changed the amount of money I left to Redemption Heights Fellowship, to match all of the love that they have showed me during the last 10 years of my life. That is her entire written statement, my uncle said, folding the letter. Now, let's get back to the bequests. He looked down at the will. The room held its breath. Reverend Finch and Pastor Doyle were sitting ramrod straight, their faces pale masks of confusion and dawning dread. Bequest to Pastor Todd Doyle, 1 cent. A collective, silent gasp. Bequest to Reverend Alistair Finch, 1 cent. The blood drained completely from their faces. They looked like statues. Bequest to Redemption Heights Fellowship, 1 cent. They sat there, jaws slack, looking like someone had just injected a gallon of Novocaine into their faces. A wave of righteous, triumphant energy washed over the family. We wanted to laugh, to cheer. But we kept quiet. We knew Grandma. This was the setup. This was the first punch. The knockout was still to come. There is one last bequest. My uncle, the lawyer, continued, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. For a charity called the Jericho Project. Most of us had never heard of it. But Reverend Finch and Pastor Doyle had. The look on their faces was not just shock. It was horror. It was the expression of men who had just seen a ghost. A ghost from a past they desperately wanted to keep buried. As we would learn later, the Jericho Project was sponsored by a large black church just a few miles away. Years ago, Redemption Heights had briefly supported them before a bitter public breakup. The official reason was a theological dispute over the social gospel. The real reason, in the Deep South, was racism. The black church was seen as getting uppity. My grandparents had almost left the church over it, but stayed to try and be a force for good. All these years, we discovered, they had been secretly sending a portion of their tithe to the Jericho Project every single month. Giving this money to the Jericho Project wasn't just a donation. It was a statement. It was my sweet, gentle grandmother, from beyond the grave, looking these two men in the eye and calling them racists. It was her declaring that the black congregation they despised were better, more Christ-like people than they were. It was the most exquisitely crafted, personally devastating rebuke imaginable. Every eye in that room was fixated on the two pastors, trapped in their seats of honor, as the weight of their own history crashed down upon them. My uncle let the silence stretch, twisting the knife. Then he delivered the final, killing blow. The amount, he said, looking directly at them, and he named the exact, enormous, life-altering sum of money that Grandma had originally bequeathed to their church. The fortune they had come here today to claim. It was over. Checkmate. In the end, my grandmother's revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, intelligent, and absolute. She didn't just deny them her money. She held up a mirror and forced them, in a room full of witnesses, to see their own souls. She showed them that true faith isn't about power or money or prestige. It's about quiet service, unconditional love, and in the end, unflinching justice. What did you think of Grandma Beatrice's final sermon? Let me know in the comments below. What's the most satisfying act of poetic justice you've ever witnessed? Share your story. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories where the overlooked and underestimated finally get their due. Thanks for listening.